Hello everyone, David here, MixBestTV. Hope you guys are having a great day. Today we answer your questions. Before we start, as usual, check the info box down below for free plugin special discount and offers. And if you haven't already, take a look at the new website, mixbesttv.com. In there you can find all the mix and mastering courses, start to finish, on many different genres. You can also book all the other services, mixing, mastering, private lessons, and mix consultations. Check out the new Bella Kelly single, Goodbye. There's also an acoustic version featuring Monty Pittman. If you want to access all the exclusive videos here on YouTube, click the join button, become a MixBestTV member, and if the videos are helping you, please consider using the super thanks or grab some merch. Let's get to the questions. We're gonna start with Instagram. The first one is Phil Z. Thanks for always posting great content on your channel. I have a question. When working with mostly made digital music such as drum and bass or techno, do you lose any power, punch, or presence when going into analog gear with tubes like the Empress? I recently heard Schwab talk about this topic of tubes robbing digital songs of their power and wanted to hear your thoughts on it. Thank you for the question, first of all. All right, I know where the question comes from, and even though I didn't hear Ryan Schwab's, which is a friend of mine, take on this, I kind of said something similar in the past, but we cannot generalize as in tube gear does it. What happens with tube gear, one of the reasons because I'm extremely picky with tube gear, is that due to the nature of the tubes, the circuits where the tubes are installed, the transformers that go along with the tubes many times, what could happen, is not a given, is that some tube units have less headroom than others, meaning they tend to round off the material and soften the transients. Some of them can, again, not a rule, kind of crunch too much or too soon and almost fold in the low end. Meaning if you have, let's say, a very clean and extremely exposed 808, typical on trap or hip hop, could rob you a little bit of low end extension or crunch it too much or just saturate it in a way that is not pleasant. As for losing presence, that is, I want to say, less common because tube units tend to add harmonics and tend to add excitement either in the mid-range or top end. Some of them, again, case by case, could round off the top end just by design. It's mostly, though, due to the transformers in it and not really the tubes or the circuit or just how the unit is built. Some vintage style tube units could round the top end, but also some solid state units, if designed to do so, if tuned that way, could do the same. And going back to the beginning, that's why I am very picky with tube units. I am not a fan of tube units that have little headroom before affecting the material this way. The Empress is one of the farthest unit from this. All Gain Lab audio, and at this point I have 3 units, soon to be 4. I have the Bishop, the Empress, and the Dictator. They all are extremely high headroom tube units, and that does not happen. Now, the design of certain curves, for example, a Pultec curve, it might not be fitting EDM or electronic music because it might be too broad. But the Empress, one of the things that I love about the Empress, and is actually this function is on 99.9% of the time, is the focus switch, which tightens that bend. But it's not something that is inherent to the tube design. It's just the curve of that specific type of EQ, the Pultec type EQ. So it's definitely something that is case by case. I can totally see where Ryan comes from saying something like that about tube gear, and in certain scenarios it's definitely true. It is not true for all tube gear. I hope this answered the question. Next one is from Jao Torquado B. Do you think headphone correcting software like Sounded Real Phones is a must for mixing with headphones? I don't think it's a must. I think they can be extremely helpful, that's for sure. Even if you don't use the studio simulation, correcting the frequency response of the headphones is undoubtedly useful if done correctly. And by the way, we are about to measure my room, and it's going to be one of the available room in Real Phones soon. Next one is by Bastit93, still on Instagram. Hey David, could you explain how to mask the distortion from clippers, limiters, etc. when aiming for high LUFS? There's really nothing that you actively do to mask the distortion. Besides, I can only think of the alchemy knob in Gold Clip, which somehow helps with that. It's not something that you do actively the way you're thinking about it. And it's also hard to explain because of this. Because the truth is, masking kind of happens almost naturally, and it's not something that at least I do consciously. When you have a lot of experience in using clippers and aiming for low crest factors and high LUFS, it's hundreds of small moves done track by track or group by group, and also at the mastering stage or on the mix bus, that kind of make the mix pleasant or the master pleasant. So it's really hard for me to pinpoint this is what you do, because the main factor that masks the bad distortion and saturation from clipping and limiting, which, by the way, after a certain level, you're gonna sound bad. There's no way around it. But the first factor is the source material. Let me give you an example. In a ballad with just piano, strings, and vocals, any type of distortion will be extremely exposed, and everybody's gonna hear it. You can't mask that. There's no way to mask it other than trying to, first of all, limit your use of limiters and clippers. Second, picking the one that reacts better for that given track, right? So some clippers perform extremely well on short audio events, meaning kick and snare, toms, transient material, right? Some clippers perform better, meaning you can clip more with less distortion on long audio events. So maybe a piano, maybe a string section, maybe a bass. So that's the first thing. You need to know your clippers and how they react and be able to hear even the slightest distortion. And how you do that? You train your ears first, and second, you have to have a monitoring system that exposes any kind of bad distortion, which is not a given. You kind of have to have a good monitoring system for that. A metal song with electric guitars and growly basses, or an industrial song which already has distortion in it, will automatically mask the added distortion from the clippers and the limiters. Dubstep, why they're so loud? Because it's already saw sine waves and triangle distorted waves. So when you add the saturation or the distortion, it kind of blends in and you can get away with a lot more. And the other big factor, like I said many times, is you don't try to shoot for the LUFS, high LUFS, actually low LUFS in this case, at the mastering stage or on the mix bus, which is the same exact thing if you master your own music. But it's a long and hard process that takes place from your single kick track, from your sum of the many kick tracks, and then your snare, and then your snare group, and then your drums, and then your bass and vocals, little by little. Because of course, if you apply a little bit of distortion or a little bit of saturation on limiting, I'm not a big fan of limiting. If you do it on multiple stages and multiple tracks, first of all, you have much more control than slapping a clipper on your master, on your two bus, and just clipping everything. And second, you really minimize distortion in doing that. This would be a really long subject if I were to like really go deep into it, but think about it this way. If you have a sine wave at, let's say, 100, right? Try to look it in your analyzer. Open a sine wave at 300, 100, whatever you want, 400, and then you add a distortion, a saturator on it, right? You can see the harmonics. You can see like 1, 2, 3, 10 harmonic, depending on the saturator, depending on the intensity. If you add a sound that has two sine waves in it, one at 100 and one, let's say, 850, and you apply the same saturator, you can see a lot more harmonics, right? So this is to say that when you feed a really complex sound, a full mix, to a clipper, you're gonna have a lot more of intermodulation and a lot more unwanted distortion from it than if you apply the clipper or the limiting or the saturation to the single tracks. You have a lot more control. So these are kind of the three things to keep in mind. There's really not much that I can think of that we do to mask it, other than probably trying to find a good compromise between energy and volume, as in LUFS. Let's say, for example, you have a trap or hip hop track, right? You go and try to get to higher level clipper limiters, your low end most likely is the one that is going to crap first, right? Big 808, big kicks. EDM, same thing. In this case, if you think it's a good idea, I don't, but if you think it's a good idea, you can find a compromise between the level that you wish to reach, LUFS, and how much low end you have. As you reduce the low end, the distortion is going to reduce, your overall level will go up, your loudness numbers will go down, meaning it's going to be louder, but you're going to have a smaller low end. Metal, industrial, rock track, they usually have a lot of energy in the mid-range, vocals, snares, cymbals, electric guitars, or harsh synths, right? Same thing, when you go and saturate, those 3, 6K, 1K area can become harsh and really hard to listen to, so you might want to reduce the range and feed less into your final chain of limiting, clipping, etc. At the expenses of what? At the expenses of the aggression and the energy, because those songs have the power there. The power as in the intelligibility, the crack of the snare, the punch of the guitars, all these things. So it's gonna be a little bit of a battle that way. I personally never do that unless the client has a specific request. I wanna be loud AF and that's it. That's my priority. In this case, you do what you have to do, but otherwise I always prefer having a mix that is 1 dB less or 1.5 dB less, but it sounds like I want it to sound. To be completely honest, the truth is also that when a mix is well balanced, unless we are talking about a ridiculous level like -4 and down, I usually never have a problem with distortion and limiting and loudness. So the key is always the same: have a balanced mix that sound good. Next one, Jay made: when contacting a producer, would it be wise to copyright your lyrics before sending them the idea for them to produce? Yes. 100%. Unfortunately, this happens every day, multiple times a day probably, and happens at any level, at the low level as well as the top of the top. People steal good ideas. That's a fact. Has always happened. It's happening right now and it's gonna happen tomorrow. So always try to cover your butt when you send things out, when you have demos, when you have lyrics, when you have melodies, when you have anything. It's not easy because when you have unreleased material and you have to keep it unreleased, it's not so straightforward to copyright it, especially if you just have lyrics. You can't deposit that as a song, you can't register that as a song. So it's not that hard either, but you need to really look into it when you have, like, for example, just the lyrics, okay? But for what I've seen in the industry, never send anything to anybody that you don't have some kind of proof that is yours. Next one is T. Scott Music. Hello, David. What's your opinion on the delicate question of mixing price? It is better to start a business and say, okay, this is what I cost, this is what I can do and what I'm worth, knowing it can be too expensive for some clients on a budget, or start with a low price and consider the other mixes and go like, I will make cheaper mixes but more mixes and get more clients, so in the end I can earn a decent living. Well, like I said in that video, it all depends. Here's the thing, you have to look at this like any other business model, let's put it this way. So there are classes of the types of jobs, right? We start from the lowest meaning usually the one that is paid less. What is it? Is being paid for your time, meaning I know how to do this thing, but I'm paying you because I don't want to do it, because I have other things that makes me more money, and that's a better way to invest my time. I pay you X amount per hour to do those things because for me it's cheaper to pay you than to waste 10 hours doing it myself. The next one is you see the class of people that make more money than the first is being paid for your skills, right? Let's take a surgeon. Everybody prepares the table, everybody prepares anything. He goes in, maybe it takes an hour, 2 hours to do the operation and is paid a fuck ton of money. While the guy that cleans the gym, in 2 hours, he is paid probably, I don't know, $17, $28 an hour. So he's paid for his time. The doctor is paid for his skills. And this is kind of the way you have to look at what you just described. If you're doing cheaper mixes, but you do a lot of them, you're being paid for your time. You're being paid for your time, not for your value, not for your skills. If you are worth it, you get paid for your skills. You can take 2 hours to do a mix, 2 days, or 30 minutes. It doesn't matter. And this is something that it pops out sometimes in mastering discussion. How long does it take you to, master a song? It doesn't matter how much it takes me. It could take me an hour, it could take me 10 minutes. You're not paying me for the 10 minutes or for the hour. You're paying me for the 20 years that it took me to get this good at it. Make sense? The disconnect is when you say, knowing it can be too expensive for some clients on a budget. I'm sorry. Lamborghinis doesn't lower their prices for people who can afford it because it's Lamborghini. It depends what kind of clientele you want to work with. And of course, everybody would want to work with higher and better paying clients. Nothing is too expensive. It's just either you're worth it or not. Either you deliver something and make the client happy or not. Lamborghini is too expensive for many people, but there's a fuckload of people that buys it. Why? Because they want what they offer. And so I can't tell you what to do. I can't tell you what to do because at the end of the day, I could even tell you what I think it's better, but it would be pretty useless because if your clientele doesn't have the amount of money that you ask for a mix, they don't have it. It doesn't matter how good you are. It's up to you to decide case by case, probably, all right, I want to take part in this project, even if I'm getting paid less, because whatever reason, it could be many reasons, because you can decide to lower your prices. You like the artist, you like the song, you think they're gonna go somewhere, whatever reason. I can't tell you which one would be better long-term for your career because everybody's career is different. Usually 90% of the time, what you see in this business is you get what you pay. If you pay chump change, you got the monkeys. And there are people out there that say, oh, this guy mixes for $50 and sounds awesome. Well, if you think so, then we are good. Most likely it doesn't. But not everybody knows how to judge a mix. That's why you don't see big artists and successful artists going on Fiverr and buying mixes for $50 or $200. There's a reason for it. Just like engineers are not all at the same level, artists are not at the same level. And so they go hand in hand. That's bracket of market, that's fine. It also depends where you are, what kind of genre or genres you want to work with, what's your portfolio, and many other things. All right, let's switch to Facebook. And by the way, if you have questions, leave them in the comment down below. From Richard Jensen, do you prefer top-down mixing? If so, what is usually on your mix bus from the start? Or do you prefer to get all the mix elements sounding good before you start adding compression, etc. to your mix bus? This is well documented across basically all my mixing, mastering courses and videos. I wouldn't say I mix top down, because a lot of people interpret mixing top down as in working on your 2-bus first and then groups and then only if needed on single tracks. I don't operate that way, but I do set my mix bus first, always. The client send me the tracks, I spread them on Pro Tools, I do my gain staging, and I do a rough mix, level and pans. This takes anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes. And at that point, I set up my 2-bus. And before, years ago, it would take me a minute to figure out what to put on my 2-bus. Maybe I would change it halfway through because I misjudged a couple of things. But right now, that doesn't happen anymore. I set up my 2-bus, and 90% of the time, it stays as is. And the reason is because, to me, you need to mix in to your chain. There's no such thing as adding things on your 2-bus at the end, other than probably EQ. I never use EQ on my 2-bus from the get-go. There's never an EQ. It's patched in. Actually, there's 3 patched in, but they are flat, they are bypassed until I am maybe 80% of the mix. And then I realized, you know what, I need a little bit of, I don't know, top end or low end, or I need to reshape this, or there's a little bit too 300, something like that. Very small minor moves, and it's always at the end. I never mix with an EQ from the get-go, but I do mix with saturation, I do mix with compression. And for that, the key is, once you've done gain staging, you set your saturation, your compression, or whatever other processor I have, and then I go back to the top. I start from the drum and I start mixing the single elements and group everything. The key is you need to level match every single process you do. I stress this so many times. First of all, so that you don't fool yourself. Louder is better, right? That's the first thing. And second, because when you set your tubas, you don't want to hit it wildly different from when you start to when you end. I usually start conservative because I know with the parallel channels and the parallel saturation and just pushing things into all the hardware I have, I will end up with 2-3 dB more than my rough mix that's normal, especially on a high track count, plus all the effects and everything. Next one is Lukas Mikalski. A couple of weeks ago, you uploaded a video how to get your drums to smack. In the video, you use linear phase EQ for HPF on room mics to keep the phase relationship intact. Yes, with the rest of the closed mics. Makes perfect sense. My question is, apart from linear phase HPF, when you do any further EQ moves like cuts or boosts as well as LPF, do you also linear phase for, let's say, overhead mics or room mics, or just only HPF? Also, does the same rule apply to any instrument group? Let's say I have a guitar or vocal group. Should I also use linear phase? Thank you so much. Okay, so no, I don't use linear phase for anything other than EQ in parallel, meaning, let's say I parallel a vocal or I parallel a bass. If I'm gonna EQ the parallel, I'm gonna use a linear phase because we have a copy of a track. In which case, if you, especially when we're talking about overheads, if you have low-end content in there and you have a kick drum in closed mic, and hopefully the person who recorded it put them in phase so they sound good together. If you're gonna high pass one, there is gonna be something happening at the corner frequency where you set your HPF. Sometimes it might be nothing, and sometimes it might be a problem. If you have copies, which includes parallel, because when you send something to an aux, that's a copy, right? You're just saving an audio track. And you start EQing that, you are gonna have problems with phase. Let's say a bass, copy, you wanna distort it, you bypass, and you set your HPF on 90. I promise you, that's gonna be a hole there. There's gonna be a hollow low end from that point on. And so if you're not aware, you don't even know how to fix it. For other regions, like top end, mid-range, and other EQ moves that are not an HPF, no, I wouldn't bother using a linear phase, simply because I said this in another video, phase shift and phase cancellations in a mix happens all the time. And plus there's masking as well. So a phase shift, let's say a 500, it's probably not going to be noticeable, or you're going to compensate with other things. Plus, if you add masking to that, it would be an exercise in futility. That's not how we mix. We don't mix by numbers, okay? We mix with our ears and we have instinct. So if something lean on one side, just like when you drive the car, right? You're not gonna think, okay, this is gonna be 30 degrees, and you just do it. And so is pretty much mixing. But there are some specific cases like the HPF and parallel, which it's much better if you know the science behind it, because otherwise you don't even know how to fix the problem that is going to happen. It's not a maybe, it is going to happen. And then you don't understand why when you compare your song with the other, your low end doesn't sound right and the other kicks your ass. Okay, so for everything else, no, I wouldn't bother using a linear phase. Still Facebook, another one from Richard Jensen's. Hi David, in your journey as a mixer, what techniques, gear have helped you the most in getting your low end right? My main monitors. I know this is not the answer that you wanted, but that really is. You can't mix what you can't hear. All my biggest improvements in my managing the low end has been improving my monitoring, improving my room, improving my environment. And then of course there are some tools that are better than others that you learn along the way. For example, I really love the low end and how easier it is to mix the low end with my 542s on most of my mixes. Device DS1 if I have any particular problem. I learned how important is the source sound and the production for the low end, just as much as mixing, because it's really hard to fix a shitty sound selection for the low end, you know, in mixing. It's really hard. Yeah, those things, but the biggest, you can't mix what you can't hear. Next one is from Alexei Kononeko. David, it would be interesting to hear your approach regarding monitoring. I remember you once said that your room is tuned for the main monitors, but what specific information are you checking on midfield and near fields, headphones, etc.? Thank you. Yeah, of course, this is not going to be a generic answer that, you know, it's valid for everybody, because there's a specific reason why I have my midfield and why I have my headphones, because that's my MO. And that's what I like to combine. But yes, so even my midfield, the old Genelecs that I have, yes, the room is tuned for the big one, but it's not like we have a massively screwed response on the midfield either. But the old gens for me have two purposes. One, because basically they have an octave less than the mains, it forces me to focus on the higher portion of the low end more. So if I have a problem, let's say a 120 or 140 or dreaded 220 for bass and A notes, that is always a problem. It's not that I cannot hear on the mains, but I mix on the mains for probably 70% of the time, right? So you get used to certain things. And so by switching to the midfield, you have a different perspective, and because you literally are missing the lower octave, now it focuses on the higher portion of the low end, and if there's something that jumps out, you hear it immediately, you can fix it. And the second thing is the high mid-range on the gens. They are very fast on the transient, and if something is harsh or hard or pushed too much, especially when you crank the volume, it's easier for me to find it there, because it hurts my ears. Like, they don't sound pleasant at all. So if something is screechy, you can find it immediately. And it's also a very, very different sound and texture from Eve Audio Twitter. This one is really unforgiving, but it's not the kind of brightness and detail that makes you go too far on the other end, meaning it's so bright that you start cutting high end and high mid-range, and then your mix sounds dual out there. If it sounds smooth there, it's gonna sound smooth. But if it sounds smooth there and sounds dark on the Eve, I know it's gonna sound too dark. And then my headphones, for example, HD 600, it's my most used. I also use a pair of Neumann, I don't remember the name, but mostly it's the Sense 600. That's kind of another check for the top end, because I noticed that, probably because I get fatigued, everybody does, when mixing for a long time, sometimes what happens is my mix is not as bright as I would, especially if I'm mixing pop or maybe some metal tracks. I tend to like, my taste is a little darker than others. But of course, you know, my song is the client, so if they give me a reference, I notice that I tend to land a little darker than others. That's why I have a variety of top boost hardware EQs. And it's also a lot easier to add brightness than to take it away when you put too much. So I kind of purposely stay a little darker. And again, because you get used to the system you're mixing for so long, I noticed the easiest way for me to assess if my mix is slightly darker compared to a reference or compared to one of my old mixes. And I really like the top end of the 600. It's very clear, not hyped, very extended, and again, it kind of makes me focus on that range a little more. It's a little bit like having a zoom lens, you know, for that. Yeah, and actually the JBLs, I use them to edit for the most part, and I used to just hear sounds when I don't want to turn all my system on. But I found, because of course I switched to them just out of curiosity sometimes, and I found out they are very revealing in the low mid area. So 250 to 400, if there's something that is really boxy, because they are kind of boxy themselves to begin with, it's a really quick way to, you know, check that range as well as like, okay, if they're boxy here, you know, it's gonna be a little boxy out there as well. So they also have a function for that. Clark Klagenfurt, what was your biggest aha moment in mixing? I don't know. There's many. I think probably the distressor on vocals was one of my aha moments. And that was it. I went to like probably grind to find the way to just make the vocals sound and sit the way I wanted them, and spend like so much time automating, which I still do. And it's not substitution for automation, but the distressor on vocals was one of those moments in which I said, like, really, like I sweat so much for so long, and then all I had to do is this. Besides that, I don't think I had many aha moments. It's more like a little aha moments, you know, every time you do a mix or every time you listen to another mix and you understand what happened there. I think studying other mixes is my biggest aha moments, because I have always had a passion for trying to dissect other people's mixes, namely Andy Wallace. But And that it's more a ha moment than anything else, just trying to understand how they did it, try to understand also productions, right? Because a lot of people listen to music casually. We listen to the mix, we listen to the sub layers and to the arrangement, and oh, hold on, this is not an effect, this is another take. And so all those things were all small aha moments. And of course, almost every piece of hardware I have here, I have it because it was kind of a aha moment. It was kind of a like, oh my God, this sound, now I understand how they do this, you know, with this one, or, you know, something like that. We go on YouTube now. There was a question from one of our subscribers if I heard or worked on the recently released McSolaar album. I responded actually to the comment. I didn't hear it. I actually did work on one song that I saw it is not in the album, but things in Claude's camp are very, very complicated. So there's multiple producers, there's multiple people that have a say in everything. So I actually started working, I actually finished one of the songs with one of their producers here, and then I don't know what happened after, but no, I didn't hear the album. This question is for Carter Linked X. If you print every channel through an SSL alpha channel and sum those all together through a cheap Soundcraft mixing panel, would that make a huge difference comparing to mixing directly on an SSL? It will make a huge difference. First of all, the alpha channel is really not the flagship sound of SSL. Also, preamps in general are not really the one thing that everybody loves SSL for. Although they have a new preamp which is got drives and is awesome, the 4-channel 8-channel, but console-wise, historically, people recorded on either with external preamps, Neve API, or they tracked on consoles alike, and then they mixed on SSL. So they were using the line input, not really the microphone. So going through an alpha channel strip, which it really has no heritage of SSL sound, so to speak. The SSL sound comes from mostly from the EQs, E series, G series, comes from the channel compressors, again, E series, G series, to a lesser extent the J, just for number of years in use, because the J, the 9000 is great as well, but it comes from the processing of the SSL. And it comes from the sound of the buses and auxes and summing stages in the console. So, and most important, not only you're missing all that by running it through a channel alpha, but you're saying something that extremely important, summing it all into a cheap whatever brand. Your chain is as strong as your weakest link. So let's say I had all this, right? But everything goes, when I print, goes through a Behringer 2-channel and I capture with that, or, you know, that would be completely useless. You know, your chain is as strong as your weakest link. So your chain needs to be at the same level. Doesn't matter. Even if you run everything through G and E channels, console and processors, and then you sum it on a cheap board, it'll sound as cheap as that board. That's it. That's how much difference that is. Unfortunately or fortunately, this is the reality in the audio world. While there are a few hacks, meaning a few ways to spend a little and get a lot of value, the truth is you get what you pay for. That's it. Next is Studio 22 Mix. What kind of room calibration software do you use? I don't. None. Not here. I use the new HRK multimedia box at the second studio I have here in LA, but I don't use any here. Next one is Rick Elliott 821. Can the Flock LT place non-analog rack mount hardware, for example, Lexicon Digitech, in the signal chain, or do you record with the applied source and then route via sense the compressor and preamp to the Flock accordingly? The Flock is an analog patch bay. It's just digitally controlled. So you know the old patch bay with the TRS? That's what the Flock is. It just, instead of using the cables and moving manually, it's got relay switches inside that are digitally controlled. So I'm not sure about, I understand the question. If you're trying to patch digital units that don't have analog input and output, then no, you can't. If you're talking about units that have analog input and outputs, whether are XLR or TRS, yes, you can patch them in and use them, you know, on the flock any way you want. Next one is Mr. Akatinka. I've noticed that you don't have a broad strokes color in EQ, especially for the mids like Giraffe G14S or a massive passive in your mastering chain. Is that something you do in the box with Michelangelo, for example, or is there something about the EQs in your rack that I'm missing? So the Empress actually have a midband, and it's definitely broad. It's definitely not clinical or, you know, a narrow Q. So the Empress the beauty of it is basically a Pultesteig with a midband, and you can cut and boost. So that would be it. The SPL does everything, although you're right, it's not colored for sure. Besides that one, all my EQs are very colored. The API is very colored. The Mag EQ is a colored EQ. The Synth is a colored EQ, although it doesn't have mid-band. The drummer as well, this 1974, is mildly colored, but definitely the Michelangelo does the job in the box. But here's the truth. I have 1, 2, 3, 4 EQs coming in hardware. Most of them, all of them are colored. So that's why you don't see them now at the moment. But I have enough EQs at this point that I really don't feel the need of wider than the Empress midband or something I can really do with the SPL, and then I can add color, because that's the other thing. I have so many saturators and so many boxes just for color. I don't really feel the need of that. And the massive passive, I like it, I don't love it. You know, if we go back to the question that I answered, one of the first question about tube gear and headroom, that's, you know, also why. But yeah, the truth is there's 4 EQs that are coming in, all colored. So you'll see your colored mid-band soon. AH23794, one of our members, thank you for being a member, support the channel. Have you done or plan on doing a review video on the HRK Tape Emulators? I have a pair, I love them, and I would love to see application you'd use them for. I will, I don't know when, because I'm extremely busy right now. And actually, here's the truth. They are in the rack, but I don't have channels. So I have actually another 16A here, which just arrived a few days ago because I ran out of channels again. So they are in the rack, but they're not patched in. And so I have to wait to install the 16A, and plus there's 4 other units that are coming in, and I will do it at some point. I don't know when. The Chromatic 355, have MWTM contacted you yet? It's a mix with the masters. No, they didn't. I don't think I have, you know, the credits that they are looking for their, you know, for their instructors and for their people. They want people who worked with, you know, A-list people, and that's all they do. So they didn't, which is funny though, because I talked to one of the guys that was in the board. This was a long time ago, before the pandemic at NAMM, and we were talking about collaborating in some way, but then he doesn't work at Mix with the Masters anymore, and you know, I never pursued anything. But thank you for asking. It would be nice. I'm open to it, but again, they only seem to work with, like, you know, top of the top Billboard credit people, and that's fine. Last one for today. Sebastian got 25. Is automation after the final limiter a thing? No, it's not. It's not, because unless you lower the volume, that's the only option. No, because even if you touch a 0.1 after limiting, you're gonna clip. So no. And that's it for this video. I hope you guys liked it. If you have questions for the Q&A, leave them in the comments down below. Check Bella Kelly's new single, Goodbye, share it. It would be much appreciated. Join the channel to access all the exclusive videos here on YouTube. Go to the website for all the other services and all the mix and mastering courses. If you want to support the channel, grab some merch or use a super thanks. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already. Stay safe. See you next time.